3 years ago, I was the most promising member of the mountaineering team, on the verge of conquering the ultimate challenge. But after an avalanche, I was killed by my husband, Gareth Knight's first love. She stole my thermal gear, seized my supplies, and even disregarded my pleas, kicking me off a cliff. When the rescue team arrived, she claimed that I had taken her survival equipment to save myself. Gareth believed her lies and personally wrote the report that removed me from the World Mountaineering Team. My parents declared they didn't have such a cowardly daughter. Even my older brother, who worked in rescue, cursed me to die a terrible death. Everyone believed I was the guilty one. It wasn't until 2 years later, when my brother found my body buried under the snow. After all this time, I watched silently from above, a body ravaged by frostbite laid on the autopsy table. A thin layer of ice covered its surface. The skin was a sickly blue-purple. The expression on the face was frozen and stiff. It was so gruesome I almost didn't recognize it as myself. "Gareth, you're here?" My brother, who had found my body, raised an eyebrow at the man who had rushed from Cloud City. "I've done a preliminary examination. There are sharp, jagged cuts on the face, and no items to identify the body. It's highly likely a murder case." Gareth paused as he changed his clothes, his hands momentarily still. He then put on his mask with an indifferent expression. I watched the pale man, my mind in a daze. I had been dead for 2 years. 2 years of my soul enduring the biting, frigid winds day and night. I never imagined that my own husband would perform my autopsy. Gareth approached the autopsy table. Even with all his experience, he still couldn't help but frown when his gaze fell on my body. Seeing Gareth hesitate, my brother couldn't help but explain. "The team didn't plan on asking you to come all the way here. After all, Serafina is about to give birth, her first child no less. You should be by her side, but don't say any more. I'm here and I will do a good job. But regarding Serafina, you have to keep this from her. She's delicate and can hold on to things. She will get upset." The frostiness in Gareth's eyes melted at the mention of Serafina, replaced by a gentle tenderness. My brother, affected by this doting husband image, laughed and told him not to torment single men. My heart felt like it had been clenched, a dull, aching pain spreading through me. In these past 2 years, he had already married the woman who killed me, and was about to have her baby. After a bit of small talk, Gareth picked up the scalpel and began a methodical examination of my body. The face has been wounded by a sharp object, 42 cuts in total. There are abrasions and ligature marks on the neck, suggesting the victim was strangled and then pushed off a cliff. As soon as the words left his mouth, my brother burst out with a curse. What kind of grudge was this? Why go to such lengths to hurt someone? Gareth's expression was solemn, his eyes full of suppressed rage. "It's more than that. Based on the wounds on the hands, the deceased was conscious when these atrocities occurred." Gareth looked at my right hand. There's a mark on the ring finger where a ring was worn, indicating they were married. The next moment he reached out to touch my wrist. There are no markings on the red string, so this target is too broad. I smiled bitterly at Gareth's clinical statements, but this red string was a bracelet he'd put on me himself. When his gaze landed on my abdomen, there was a flicker of sorrow in Gareth's eyes. There is a scar on the abdomen, and the lower abdomen is slightly swollen, indicating she was about 3 months pregnant. A 3-month-old fetus already had the major organs formed. The bones and muscles were beginning to develop, fingers and toes were clearly visible. I remembered the first time I saw the ultrasound. I felt an uncontainable joy at seeing that blurry little image. But I hadn't had the chance to tell Gareth the good news before that sudden mountaineering mission tore me away. I was 26 years old back then. If I missed this opportunity, I might never be able to conquer the challenge. But I never imagined that this climb would be my last. The slight swelling of my abdomen was my child, a child I had longed for 3 years. If I were still alive, if that child had been safely born, they would be clinging to me now, calling me mommy in their sweet voice. But I would never hear it now. My nose stung and tears fell on the ground. Gareth took off his mask and instructed my brother, who was collecting blood samples. "The deceased's identity is unknown. A DNA test to confirm identity should be done. Focus on tourists and mountaineers from 2 years ago." 2 years ago? My brother suddenly looked up, about to say something, but quickly stopped himself. This unusual reaction made Gareth sigh. What are you trying to ask? Gareth, Wynne disappeared 2 years ago. Could this body be? It can't be her. Gareth interrupted coldly. Just as I thought I held some importance in his heart, Gareth said something even more hurtful. She took all the team's supplies and deserted us, including millions in funding. If she was really dead, she wouldn't be here. Gareth, it's been 2 years. Are you still angry at Wynne? My brother smiled bitterly. Even when he thought of me as a sinner, he'd cursed me to die a miserable death. But as time passed, he gradually began to accept reality. What she did was wrong, but you personally wrote the report that removed Wynne from the World Mountaineering team. It's been 2 years, you should let it go. I listened quietly to my brother, but I was stunned. How could Gareth revoke my qualifications as a mountaineer? He knew how important mountaineering was to me. Just because of Serafina's baseless accusations, he destroyed the source of my pride? I've moved on long ago, but I feel sorry for Serafina. She trusted Wynne so much. Yet in that moment of crisis, Wynne stole all her supplies and left her alone in the freezing cold. Facing Gareth's cold words, my brother sighed and stopped speaking for me. After all, in everyone's eyes, I was a runaway criminal. After finishing the task, the first thing Gareth did upon returning to the cabin was to call Serafina. Is everything resolved? The sickeningly sweet tone on the other side of the line immediately caused the frown on Gareth's face to relax. Almost once the DNA results come out, I can come back and be with you. It will be perfect timing for our son's birth. When he mentioned their unborn child, Gareth's dark eyes sparkled with countless affections. Without me by your side, you must take care of yourself. Don't endure the swollen feet and back pain. Contact the doctor or nurse immediately. And, alright, I know you care, it's just some aches and pains. I endured so much pain back then, what is this? Serafina's feigned understanding made me want to vomit. I wanted to tear her hypocritical face through the phone. Don't worry. Wynne can escape for a while, but she can't escape forever. I will personally bring her to you to atone. As Gareth said this, his tone grew cold, and a murderous aura filled his eyes. Serafina only had to say a few words, and she easily stirred up Gareth's hatred for me. This made my situation even clearer. Gareth never trusted me. Before our relationship, I didn't know that Gareth had a first love hidden deep in his heart. I only remembered that when I was being harassed by a client during my internship, he was the one who stood up for me and beat the guy up. Even though Gareth was fired for that incident, he didn't regret it. But I cried and said that I had caused him trouble. Gareth didn't mind my weakness and handed me a piece of paper. This has nothing to do with you. I didn't plan on working here for long anyways. I want to be a forensic pathologist. Are you afraid? I was somewhat envious of Gareth's courage, although I didn't understand why he suddenly mentioned the future. Later, we naturally fell in love. Gareth was so good to me that everyone around me advised me to hold on to this irreplaceable man. Perhaps it was too romantic, like a hero rescuing a damsel in distress. This caused me to filter my relationship through a romanticized lens, and I confidently believed that we could reach our happy ending. But in the 3rd year of our marriage, the ex-girlfriend who had broken up with him, claiming the need to study, returned home. From that point on, Gareth changed. Every night, he would still buy me a bouquet of flowers when he came home from work, but he no longer hid the flowers behind his back for me to guess what they were. He would also leave in the middle of the night due to a phone call, even if it was pouring rain. I'd almost forgotten the last time we ate a meal without being interrupted. The final straw that broke the camel's back was when, for Serafina's whim, he specifically asked me to bring her along on the mountaineering expedition. An inexperienced novice mountaineer does not need to challenge such high difficulty the first time. My kind advice was perceived as jealousy and an intentional attempt to make things difficult. Can you stop being so jealous? Serafina and I are just friends. Besides, Serafina had some mountaineering experience when she was studying abroad. Don't look down on her. Also, I hope you pay attention to your tone in the future. I am your husband, not one of your team members. Gareth knew very well who his wife was, but he actually yelled at me for the sake of his so-called friend and even mocked me sarcastically. I finally gave in. We were a couple and I didn't want to end up fighting. On the night before departure, I saw the latest chat between Gareth and Serafina on his phone. If I hadn't chosen to break up that year, would you have married me? Gareth's answer was, I would definitely marry you, but now there is no opportunity. After being with Wynne for so many years, not divorcing her is just a husband's responsibility. My hands and feet turned numb when I read this. The difference between love and being loveless was so obvious. I was just a reluctant choice for Gareth, and Serafina was his love, the one he was not able to attain during his youth. I tore up the pregnancy test and fearlessly chose to take one last mountaineering challenge. I originally planned to divorce Gareth after returning, and to let him be with Serafina. But I never expected that I would never return. Gareth said Serafina knew more about climbing than I did. But she had less weight to carry, and she was delicate. The entire team was trapped halfway up the mountain due to her mistake. The other members of the mountaineering team did not blame the newbie. They sighed and assigned the two of us to guard the supplies while they sought help. Serafina had already regretted the climb. She wanted to privately take the supplies and escape, hoping to be rescued alone. After I discovered her plan, Serafina got angry and told me to leave. Behind me, rescue personnel were approaching, wearing orange uniforms. Serafina did not hesitate. She kicked all the supplies off the cliff. Quickly grabbing the rope used to set up tents, she strangled my neck with it. While I cried out for help, she used a knife to slash my throat. Even before the rescue team got close, she used the knife again to slice up my face. In order to prevent anyone from recognizing me, she tore off the diamond ring on my hand and dragged the body over to throw me off the cliff. Who told you to steal Gareth when I wasn't around? He can only be mine, so you have to die. When the rescue team finally arrived, what they saw was blood everywhere, and a battered Serafina lying on the ground barely alive. Wynne, she took the supplies and ran. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. I wasn't able to keep the supplies safe. Serafina was cruel enough to herself. Even if some people didn't believe her words, they were forced to accept her claims after the examination results came out. Gareth ultimately failed to receive my DNA report. Serafina had gone into early labor. He quickly packed his belongings and left. After giving the task to others, he rushed to the Cloud City Hospital with my brother. And my soul was finally free to leave the cold mountain. Outside the operating room, my parents were waiting anxiously for the results. When they saw Gareth, my mother punched him. I told you not to go there. My unfilial daughter made a mistake on the mountain. What were you doing there? My mother cried and scolded me for being unfilial. Sometimes I really wish she had just died on that mountain so I wouldn't have to atone for her sins in this life. I gave birth to a debt collector. It turned out that in these 2 years, my parents had become Gareth's parents, and Serafina had taken my place. Mom, what's in the past is in the past, don't bring it up anymore. My brother frowned. He was the only person here who could say anything nice for me, even if it was a statement that would make everyone eventually forget me. Why can't I bring it up? My father, stern-faced, clenched his fists. Wynne doesn't deserve to be a member of the one family. I regret not having strangled her when she was born. How could she have taken the supplies and run just to save herself? My father was a police officer. The person he despised the most was someone who was afraid of death. Although I didn't follow the path he wished for me, he supported my mountaineering dream. I only wish you the best in this life. My daughter, I don't ask for wealth and glory. I only ask that you live happily ever after. But now my father was calling me a vile daughter, and his disgusted tone caused me to press my hand against my chest. I could still feel pain when being misunderstood by the people closest to me. Luckily, Serafina is kind and doesn't hold it against you. Still, I can't help but feel bad. My father patted Gareth's shoulder. Even without my daughter, we are still a family. Serafina's child is also my one family's grandchild. But Dad, your true grandson was killed by Serafina long ago. I listened to their criticism and could no longer shed a single tear of blood or sorrow. I was once a well-known mountaineer, a promising mountaineer who had the potential to conquer the most difficult challenge. But now, I was a fugitive whom everyone wanted to eliminate. We know that the one family owes Serafina an unpayable debt. This is our small apology. My father handed Gareth a folder containing a brand new real estate deed. Gareth refused, but my father insisted. This isn't for you too, it's for my grandchild. You must accept it. Looking at the familiar address on the deed, I felt mocking irony. This was the place my father promised to give to my child. He had once said that Gareth was an orphan without a car or house. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a forensic pathologist and good to me, he would not have been willing to let me marry him. But renting was not a long-term option. To avoid hurting the man's pride, my father had said that once I got pregnant, he could give the house to them. After circling around, the house eventually ended up in Gareth's hands. Only now, the house's mistress was no longer me. Dad, this gift is too precious, Gareth's eyes instantly turned red. My father sighed. At that moment I realized the stern father in my memory had aged with white hair. Accept it. We're family. If you refuse again, I'll get angry. As for Win, I'll act as if I never had a daughter like her. Just live happily with Serafina. I don't have any other requirements. The phone rang. Gareth, not bothering to refuse my father any longer, quickly picked it up. Gareth, the test results are out. The assistant who took over the task sounded unusually serious. I even detected a hint of hesitation. But at this time Gareth didn't have the mind to think about any of this. All his attention was on Serafina, separated by a single wall and currently giving birth. The deceased is. At the same time, a baby's cry could be heard from the delivery room. Quickly, what is it? My wife is still in the hospital giving birth. Gareth was even more impatient. The assistant's voice trembled. The deceased is Win Reed, who disappeared 2 years ago. Gareth's eyes were filled with disbelief. His mouth slightly opened, but he could not utter a single sound. The crisp sound of the phone falling to the ground caught everyone's attention. My mother couldn't help but ask worriedly, Gareth, who called? You're going to be a father soon. So take it easy and spend more time with your family. Gareth composed himself, and when he bent down to pick up the phone, the broken phone speaker was playing the voice of the person on the other side of the line. Gareth, did you hear that? The body is Win Reed herself. She didn't escape the mountain 2 years ago. Say that again. How could that body be my sister's? Wasn't she supposed to have run off with the money? My brother grabbed the broken phone, questioning the person on the other end. Even if she did die, it wouldn't be on that mountain. My brother was saying it was impossible, but his eyes had turned red. The parents who had cursed me wishing I was dead also heard my brother's words. My mother covered her chest and retreated a few steps until she leaned on the wall, before she found the strength to speak. How could Win be dead? Didn't you say she was a fugitive? Gareth, tell your aunt, is my daughter still alive? Is that person just a victim with the same name? My mother, with red eyes, questioned Gareth, hoping he would tell her that I was still alive. But at this time, Gareth's mind was in turmoil. He licked his lips unconsciously. It was a sign of Gareth's anxiety. Whenever he encountered a corpse with no clues, he would lick his lips. Mom, don't worry, I'll go and see. Gareth took back the phone and was about to head back to the mountain, but was stopped by my father, who grabbed his arm. What are you going to do? Serafina just gave birth. Do you really not want to see your child as a father? My father squeezed the words out from between his teeth. It was as if even though it was his own daughter who died, he did not seem to care. She did such a terrible thing, she deserved to die. Why are you so worried? Dad, I'm not worried. I just have an urgent mission. Please take care of Serafina and the child for me. As soon as he finished speaking, Gareth shook off my father's hand and started to leave. But at that moment, the door to the operating room opened. A midwife walked out carrying the baby, and behind her was Win Reed, lying on the bed barely alive. The mother is hemorrhaging, and you are not paying attention. The baby is born. How come no one is checking on the baby? What? Did you know beforehand that it was a daughter and decided to ignore her? The midwife's tone was cold. Everyone bowed their heads in shame, but I felt gratified. Serafina, get some rest. The team needs me urgently. I'll be back once I'm done. Okay. Gareth tenderly wiped the sweat off of Serafina's forehead, continuously apologizing. Serafina's pupils dilated. It was as if she sensed danger. She asked with a hoarse voice, "Am I and the baby more important? Or is your work more important? Serafina, did you really see when Reed take all the supplies 2 years ago?" Gareth's sudden question caused Serafina, who was previously full of vigor, to deflate. But soon she regained her composure, tearfully recounting the baseless harm I had supposedly caused her back then. "Are you doubting that I'm lying? I almost died on that mountain. Don't you know how desperate I was at that time?" Her hysteria, caused by childbirth, made Serafina look all the more repulsive. "I'm sorry, Serafina. I really can't delay any longer. I'll apologize when I get back." Gareth, pale-faced and remorseful, dared not meet her gaze and left without looking back. My mother and brother followed closely behind. Serafina's godfather saw this and gritted his teeth in anger. "What happened, Dad? Why did they all leave?" Serafina choked on her words. It was supposed to be the most important moment in her life. The day she gave birth, but one by one, the people who had been so nice to her were leaving. Serafina's heart completely shattered. No wonder my dad was so good to her. It turned out she had won his approval in these past 2 years. Being both his goddaughter and his daughter-in-law, it was no wonder my dad didn't care about whether I lived or died. I suddenly became curious. If my dad knew the seemingly pitiful woman in front of him was the murderer who killed his own daughter, what would he do? But contrary to my expectations, my dad didn't choose to stay and care for Serafina himself. He hastily selected a nurse for Serafina before joining the 3 people about to enter the elevator, choosing to go to the mountain with them. I had never seen Gareth in such a hurry. He, who was always so rule-abiding, ran countless red lights on his way to the airport. When they finally arrived at the makeshift autopsy room on the mountain, there were dark circles under his eyes. He once again stood before my body, only this time my parents were there too. The body was still disfigured, even more grotesque than before, due to multiple autopsies and tests. My face, slashed to ribbons by Serafina, was unrecognizably mangled. Gareth, staring at the lone red string, seemed to remember something. He quickly used scissors to cut it. Inside wasn't a strand of hair, but another black string. I had specifically emphasized the bracelet's uniqueness. The outer red string was for blessings, while the inner black string was for warding off evil. He had laughed at my superstitions back then, and casually put the peace bracelet on my wrist. "Win is my guardian angel, so with you by my side, I'm not afraid of anything." But the peace bracelet, obtained through repeated kneeling and bowing, ultimately failed to save my life. "Impossible, how could it be you? Weren't you supposed to have escaped?" Gareth's hand holding the string trembled violently. My dad leaned forward, trying to hear what Gareth was saying, but was startled by the horrific sight of the corpse and retreated a few steps. How much suffering did this person endure before death? The murderer disfigured them this way. My dad shook his head in regret and, on the side, stopped my mom from trying to get a clearer view of the body. "Don't worry, even if you and I die, that rebellious child, Win Reed, will still be alive. This corpse has an old scar on the abdomen. How can it be our daughter?" My dad's words didn't soothe my mom. Instead, she seized the opportunity to rush forward. The fact that I had a scar on my waist was only known by my mom. That was due to a deliberate retaliation against Gareth for solving a serial murder case. The killer's family didn't believe that their son, who wouldn't even dare to hold a knife, was capable of such a thing, and stubbornly believed that Gareth was trying to frame their son. After the court sentenced him to death, the man's father ambushed me near my apartment out of revenge. But Gareth was away on a temporary mission, so I became the only target of his vengeance. When the knife pierced my abdomen, I didn't cry. I was just relieved that Gareth wasn't there. If the man had destroyed his hands, Gareth's future would have been ruined. During my hospital stay, it was my mother who took care of me. She complained that Gareth was a jinx, but at my insistence, she kept the incident a secret. He saved me during our first meeting, and I was able to protect him once. My self-righteous sacrifice seemed ridiculous now. My mother cried as she stroked my scar, calling my name with heartbreaking anguish. My father, thinking she was losing her mind, coldly tried to drag her away. "What are you doing? Bad pennies always turn up. Win Reed won't die." My dad stubbornly believed that I was still alive. But my always victorious detective father was ultimately defeated by his so-called sixth sense. I was really dead. Completely and utterly dead. Gareth, you finally arrived. An assistant pushed open the door, looking slightly awkward upon seeing everyone in the room. The team just said that Wynne Reed's death needs to be thoroughly investigated. It's highly likely that she was murdered 2 years ago, instead of simply labeling her as a runaway criminal. Gareth looked down at the cut-piece bracelet, not responding to the assistant for a long time. What are you saying? Is the body lying here? Really, my daughter? My dad suddenly looked up. The moment he learned the truth, he didn't show the hysteria one would expect. He simply had a slight twitch in his facial muscles. All of you, please leave. I want to stay with her for a while. My mom wiped her tears, pulling my brother, who was in a daze, and my dad, who remained silent, away. She left the remaining time for Gareth. He trembled as he stroked my face. All these years I kept cursing you to die, but now that you're really dead, why does my heart ache so much? Wynne, are you in pain? How could I not be in pain? Strangled to the point of suffocation, my face slashed dozens of times, countless dead branches piercing my body as I fell down the cliff, hitting numerous hard rocks. But despite all of this, I still wanted to live. I still had a breath left when I fell off the cliff, but I didn't get to wait for the rescue I longed for. Late tears dripped onto my corpse. Gareth, regardless of the corpse's dilapidated state, tightly embraced me, calling my name repeatedly. But there was no one who would return his embrace, no one who would respond to his every word with affection. When Gareth came out of the autopsy room, he once again regained his usual composure. After consoling my parents, he took the broken piece bracelet and rushed to Serafina's hospital room. You know to come back? Serafina snapped at Gareth irritably. Is your wound still hurting? Gareth's face was clouded over as he said these words. How could it not hurt? During the C-section, my abdomen was cut open with such a large wound. Serafina, thinking that Gareth was concerned about her, tearfully recounted the pain she experienced during childbirth. Then what about Wynne Reed? You slashed her face 32 times. Was she not in pain? She even had to endure 2 years of scorn and humiliation because of your slander. What nonsense are you talking about? Didn't Wynne Reed take the supplies and run? Gareth, have you forgotten that these years I can't sleep well at night because of the scars she left me with? Serafina tearfully recounted her hardships, trying to use tears to gain forgiveness. But this time her emotional appeals didn't work. You said that when Reed ran away. Are you sure you saw it with your own eyes? I don't quite remember. It happened 2 years ago. Why are you bringing it up now? Am I really that untrustworthy? Serafina was so frightened that she was sweating profusely on her forehead, and even began to stutter. Gareth suddenly moved closer, his eyes bloodshot as he questioned her. Are you not remembering things, or are you simply too afraid to bring up what you did to Wynne Reed? The cry of a baby interrupted the frigid atmosphere. Serafina instinctively wanted to stand up and check on her child, but she was stopped. This has to be made clear to me. There were only the two of you there waiting for rescue. What did you do to her during that time? I didn't kill her. What if Wynne Reed accidentally fell off the cliff while she was trying to run away? I would be the prime suspect if she died. Why would I do something so self-destructive? Serafina was almost kneeling on the ground to prove her innocence. But she was too guilty. Even I, who knew nothing about forensics, could detect the flaws in her words. Not to mention Gareth, who had handled cases for many years. When did I say she died from falling off a cliff? Serafina's face instantly turned pale. She looked around in terror. Gareth, please don't investigate it anymore. Our baby has already been born. Let the past be the past. Gareth's eyes were filled with disappointment, and he gave a self-deprecating laugh. But you know what? I should have been a father 2 years ago. Wynne Reed was 3 months pregnant when she died. And what about me? You were supposed to be mine. I only left the country for a few years. Why did Wynne Reed get to take the place of Mrs. Knight? We're the ones who truly love each other. Seeing that Gareth had guessed the truth, Serafina no longer tried to deny her crime. Hysterically, she called me a thief. But weren't you the first one to reject me because of money? A vein popped out on Gareth's forehead, and he ended up vomiting blood. And this argument was heard by my parents, who followed behind. "You vile woman! How could you murder my daughter and then slander her? I've mistaken a thief as my own daughter." My mom slapped Serafina hard across the face, glaring at her through gritted teeth. "For the past 2 years we've treated you like our own daughter. Are you not afraid of Wynn's soul coming back to seek revenge at night? Why did you bring such pain upon our family? We didn't do anything wrong." My mom covered her chest and cried uncontrollably. "We did nothing wrong. Because you're stupid, you believe everything I say. How could you simply believe that your own daughter is guilty of desertion when she was gone for 2 years? A smug smile appeared on Serafina's distorted face. "You all gave me everything that belonged to Wynn Reed these past 2 years, so what's the big deal? Isn't it good that we are a happy family together?" My mom didn't expect that even now Serafina could say something so shameless. But now she hated herself even more for not insisting on searching for me. If she hadn't listened to my father's arrangement, my injustice would have been cleared 2 years ago. My dad was shocked by Serafina's duplicity. He didn't cry, instead he quickly called the police. Gareth, ignoring the woman who was crying and screaming as she was being arrested, went back to the apartment where he and I had once lived. It was now filled with the traces of his life with Serafina, not a single trace of my existence remaining. Gareth just entered the basement and the rising dust made him cough uncontrollably. He took out a storage box from the corner. Inside was everything I had written for him. There was the heartbeat and gratitude from our first meeting, the happiness and apprehension during our courtship, and the hesitation when he proposed. But each word revealed my deep affection for Gareth. But later on, the notes were filled with endless grievances and confusion about our marriage. I complained about Serafina calling him late at night, and it seems that Gareth and I are in a cold war again. I'm pregnant, but I haven't found a good time to tell Gareth. I don't want to tell him anymore after I get back. I want to divorce him. The addresses in the notes went from my dear husband to just Gareth, and finally to just a simple hymn, representing my gradual death of the heart. Gareth, in self-inflicted agony, repeatedly read my diary. "When I was wrong, I shouldn't have believed Serafina so easily. I'm such an idiot." I listened to Gareth's belated remorse, but felt no reaction. Serafina was forced into my team by him. 2 years ago, when he had to choose between Wynn and Serafina, Gareth didn't hesitate and chose to satisfy his first love's request. If he had firmly chosen me then, things wouldn't have gone this far. He was completely blinded by his so-called first love, seeking someone he could not have during his youth. Wasn't the entire tragedy caused by his desire to have everything? I spent countless days and nights in this dark basement with Gareth. He didn't eat or drink, clutching the broken piece bracelet, his eyes staring blankly at my notes, not knowing what he was thinking. Sometimes he would suddenly burst into tears, and other times he would start talking to himself, saying he would take me to see the most beautiful ocean. He always remembered that I wanted to see the ocean with him. But in our 4 years of love, Gareth always said that he was busy, and that he didn't have time. But after Serafina came back, the busy man suddenly had lots of free time. His presence could be seen in all the photos that she updated on social media. A bunch of common friends were also teasing him for not divorcing me yet. And now he's saying he wanted to take me to see the sea. Why didn't Gareth share more of his love with me when I was alive? Gareth left the house again to attend Serafina's trial. She was found guilty of intentional homicide, defamation, and many other crimes, and sentenced to death. Serafina simply could not believe the verdict. "I just gave birth and I am still breastfeeding. My child cannot leave their mother. You can't let my child be an orphan." The judge rejected her pleas, asking her in a solemn voice, "What about the one life and the fetus that you killed? That child didn't even have a chance to be born." At this point the gavel fell, and the end of the story was finally in sight. My body was cremated, and my ashes were put into a small box. The funeral was very grand. There were more guests than the day I was married, but almost all of them were my former mountaineering teammates, some of whom I had never met before. In the lies that Serafina had woven, they had righteously condemned me. But as the truth came to light, Guilt compelled them to send a bouquet of flowers as an apology to my grave. My brother held my portrait, walking step by step towards my tombstone. After all the rituals were over, my brother stood in the rain, refusing to leave my tomb for a long time. He stroked my portrait, his face filled with regret. Win, if only I had found you earlier, would you still be alive? If I had stopped you from going mountaineering, would you still be alive and kicking right by our sides? Hearing my brother's self-recriminating words, my mom's already calmed sadness rose again, and she cried once more for my death. It's all your fault. You didn't even try to find her when your own daughter went missing. My mother punched my father's chest in a fit of despair, crying and asking him to bring me back. Gareth, on the other hand, did not dare to appear at my funeral. He could only hide behind a tree, watching from afar as my ashes were buried, watching as my family fell apart because of my death. Gareth went back to the basement in a daze once again. Like a madman, he wanted to find my photos, but all of them had long been discarded by the small-minded Serafina. Finally, Gareth broke down. Completely. He leaned against the wall, curled up into a ball. Tears flowed like a river. Like a child who had made a mistake, he repeatedly murmured the same words. I was wrong, please come back, please? Not all mistakes can be forgiven even if remorse is shown. I turned towards the child waving at me not far away. My instincts told me that it was my child that I had never met. It was a girl who looked just like me, not at all like Gareth. As for the man behind me, who was breaking down and calling my name, I did not want him anymore. When I first met Win Reed, I had just broken up with Serafina. I wasn't in a good mood, and I ended up seeing the scene of her being taken advantage of by someone. It was just a small favor that I offered casually, but Win Reed kept it in her heart. She was completely different from Serafina. Serafina, like me, had ambition due to her family circumstances, and only wanted to climb higher. She, however, was like a princess in a castle. Her excessive kindness would only make her suffer. Like encountering a heartless man like me. On the day that Win Reed confessed to me, I was still wondering if Serafina would abandon her dream of becoming a wealthy socialite and come back to me if she learned of my new relationship. The one that I posted on my social media for only one person to see, did not receive any interrogation from Serafina. That was when I suddenly didn't want to wait for her anymore. After staying up the entire night, I agreed to be in a relationship with Win Reed. Being in a relationship with her was very comfortable. She would quietly listen to me talk about things at work. Sometimes she would be startled and cling to me like a frightened kitten. In the 3rd year of our relationship, we got married. Just when I thought that I would spend my entire life with Win Reed, Serafina came back a year after our wedding. The resentment in my heart rose and turned into a twisted impulse. Serafina's miserable return made me feel sorry for her, especially when she cried and said that she was full of regret. My heart twisted with a malicious satisfaction. But I forgot that I had a wife waiting for me at home. I was a married man, yet I did something that I shouldn't have. The day I learned that Win Reed had run away to survive, I was actually relieved. Relieved that she wasn't a fool and knew how to protect herself. But that was immediately followed by overwhelming disappointment. So it turned out she was just as selfish as I was. Listening to Serafina crying and saying that she would sue Win Reed for attempted murder, I asked her, "What exactly do you want?" She said that she wanted to marry me. I asked Serafina, wouldn't money do? She said no. So I compromised. I used marriage as a price, in exchange for a peaceful journey for Win Reed after she ran away. But even on the day I remarried, Win Reed never showed up. I was actually hoping that she would come and ruin my wedding. But she didn't want her parents and she didn't want me anymore. That sense of longing suddenly turned into hate. I hated that she didn't give me a chance to make things right. And that traded marriage, surprisingly, grew into something real after the passage of time. When I learned of Win Reed's death, I finally realized what it was that had been making me uneasy for the past 2 years. But I didn't have the courage to investigate. Instead, I cowardly thought that she was living freely somewhere in the world. Serafina ultimately paid the price for her crime, and her child was sent to an orphanage by me. As for me, paying for my sins with my death was the last thing I could do.